Hey, welcome to the Intact Beyond Transformation Series. My name's Nathan Dale. I'm the CEO of Intact Beyond. Thanks very much for joining us. We're a collective of subject matter experts who've all come together to help employees and communities get through this challenging time and thrive beyond. Facilitating this episode is Nicole Watson, and our subject matter expert is Dr. Mark Williams. Dr. Williams is a professor of cognitive neuroscience at Macquarie University, and he's going to be talking about habits and patterns, the way that the brain works as we go through this change, as well as looking at technology and the positive and negative ways that we can utilize technology and how we should move forward. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks very much for joining, and I'll hand it over. Cheers.
Hi, my name's Nicole Watson, and I'll be facilitating today's deep dive with Dr. Mark Williams, who will be addressing habits and patterns. Hi, Mark. How are you today?
Good. Thank you, Nicole.
Good. Great. Mark, I just wanted to start off by asking you, look, it's been a very difficult, uncertain time at the moment. Just wanted to understand, how the new work from home phenomenon has affected you personally and your business.
Okay, so it's a little interesting for me because I'm 50% of the time I'm professor of cognitive neuroscience at Macquarie University. So at Macquarie, I've got a neuroscience course that's running this year with over 900 students. And we had to put that online within around about 2 weeks. So that's been an interesting transfer. At the same time, of course, I run my own business the other 50% of the time, which is mainly presenting to different organisations, including schools. And of course, those presentations are now all online as well. So I've transitioned from spending a lot of time with a lot of different people and flying around the country to spending all my time in this office, talking to people over Zoom and other facilities. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting. Through Macquarie, it's been especially interesting because I've got several PhD students who are from overseas. So dealing with their anxiety as well has been very interesting because their families, of course, are overseas. I had two from Italy who have been very stressed over that whole situation, and very family-owned people, and also about their own work because, of course, they now can't collect data. So they're very stressed about how they're going to finish their PhD on time when it's going to be probably quite a while before they can get back to testing. So yeah, it's been interesting. Also having younger kids at home, that's been an interesting transition, and trying to juggle that.
Definitely. Well, I mean, we're all in the same position. We're all locked away in spare rooms or kitchen tables and dining tables. And I mean, I've actually asked my partner to go and stand on the balcony because he's on the phone and he's being a bit loud while we're recording. So he's been put outside. So yeah, it is challenging, and there are definitely a lot of disruptions, that are happening every day.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's been hard on everyone. Harder on some than others, but yeah, I think it's definitely been difficult for everyone.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about habits and patterns, and just first talk about what a habit actually is. So the definition of a habit is a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that's hard to give up. And you might look at that and look at the trigger. So how a habit occurs is you have a trigger which sets off a behavior or thought, which then results in a reward, which then reinforces that behavior. So you might think about this and think, well, that sounds a lot like an addiction. That is, with an addiction, of course, you have a trigger that sets off a behavior or thought, and you have a reward, and it actually is. So the areas of our brain that set up habits and also set up addictions are exactly the same areas of the brain. And from a neurological point of view, there's really no difference between a habit and an addiction, in the neural response to those two things. The only real difference is when it comes to an addiction, there's a negative impact on the person's life. So they have a negative impact on their life, either their health and or their mental well-being. Whereas with a habit, it can, of course, be a positive habit or a negative habit, but there is no real negative severe negative consequence to that thing that's actually happening. And habits actually occur in all mammals. So even mice and rats have habits. And habits are actually controlled by this primitive area of our brain that's in rats and mice. And it's there so that we can actually do other things, so that we can think about other things. So the habits are actually just set up so that we can run them automatically when we go through our day, and so that we can survive by doing those habits, and then we can do other things as well. And us as humans, of course, have this big cortex on top of those primitive areas. So we're able to do lots of other stuff on top of that that these mice and rats aren't able to do. And they basically just run off their habits. And how that all occurs is just basically via Hebbian learning. So Hebbian learning is how our brain changes itself. You've probably heard of things like neuroplasticity or brain plasticity. Hebbian learning is how that actually occurs. And so we know Hebbian learning occurs by the brain wiring itself up based on our experience and our learning. So when we learn something new, the brain rewires itself so that you actually know how to do that thing, or you remember that thing, or you set up a habit which actually controls that thing that you're actually trying to learn, or that experience. And what's interesting is that the wiring is most prolific in children, but it continues throughout life. And we know that children, especially young children, can learn something just based on one event. So one event can set up a habit or a learning or a memory that we can't actually get when we get older. But we can still learn new habits as we get older, and we can still learn new things and remember new things and so on. It just takes a little bit longer as we get older. And so the idea that was coined by Hebbian back many years ago is that cells that fire together wire together. So cells that are firing more strongly wire more strongly with each other. So the more you do something, the stronger the wiring is going to become, because those cells are firing, and each time that happens, you're going to get more and more wiring associated with that. So of course, the juxtaposition of this is that cells that aren't firing get inhibited. So things that you are doing are going to be reinforced, and they're going to be wired stronger and stronger and stronger. Things that you're not doing are going to decrease in their ability to actually fire, and those connections are going to become inhibited or actually die away, get what we call apoptosis, which is the dying away of those connections associated with that, which is why, of course, we forget things, and why we can rewire our brain for new habits, or to reinforce old habits.
Fantastic.
So one aspect to this is, of course, the dopamine system. So dopamine is a little neurotransmitter or chemicals that are released when we feel happiness, when we feel joy. So when we feel something positive, when something positive happens to us, the brain releases a little bit of dopamine and we feel pleasure. This is our pleasure drug. And this is a mechanism to get us to repeat positive things. So we want ourselves to repeat things that are positive, that are good for us. So dopamine is released whenever we do something that we feel is positive, and we get a nice positive feeling. And the dopamine actually reinforces that Hebbian learning. So it makes that Hebbian learning stronger, so that we'll repeat it again. And this happens for things like eating, drinking, and sex, because those are things that are really important for us, things that we want to become habitual, that we want them to become habits. So we continue to do them, and we do them regularly, so that we continue on as, firstly, as an individual by eating and drinking, and as a species by having sex and procreating. And we also remember the thing that happened just before we had that release of dopamine. Because the dopamine actually increases the Hebbian learning that occurs, we actually more likely remember the positive thing. So we remember, oh, that was positive, I'm going to do it again. Which is why things like eating fat is something that we really want to do, because when you eat fat, you get dopamine released. Dopamine reinforces that, and also reinforces remembering of eating that thing. So you want to actually eat it again or repeat that behavior. Similar with sugar, sex, drinking, and eating, and so on. And so you get this reinforcement of that behavior. And this is how habits and addictions, which are really the same thing, occur when this drive to repeat that behavior becomes strong. When you do it enough times, it actually becomes strong enough that you just do it automatically. You're not actually thinking about it. So when you get that cue, you actually then just do the habit or the addiction without actually thinking about it. And that's when you get a habit or an addiction occurring. So, of course, what we want to do is set up habits that are positive. We want to have this, this system going when we're doing things that are positive and not when we're doing things that are negative. And playing a guitar, I have a very good friend who is completely addicted to playing his guitar. He's an amazing guitarist, which is a great person to have when you're having a party or a dinner party, because he's an amazing guitarist. And he has the habit of every night after the kids go to bed, he sits down and plays his guitar, usually for several hours. And it's that trigger of putting the kids to bed. Oh, got time to myself. Bang, the guitar comes out and he starts playing. Very positive behavior, of course, but it is an addiction. He gets very pissed off if he doesn't get that time to actually play the guitar. And it's an absolute nightmare the next day if he doesn't get to play that guitar. It is an addiction for him, but it's a positive addiction, which is a positive thing. It becomes a negative thing, of course, when you're doing something which is affecting other parts of your life, such as gambling. So gambling, of course, can be a very negative addiction. Of course, you can just gamble and be, without becoming addicted to it. But those who become addicted to it, and they'll do it to the detriment of everything else. And they'll lose huge amounts of money. They'll lose, loved ones. They'll lose friends. Their lives fall apart because of that addiction. And that's really awful for people to get into that state. And there's also, of course, drug addiction. We know there's gaming addiction. And there's a lot of other addictions that can occur. So that's when the habit is a negative habit that then goes to the point where you're unable to control it and it becomes a really negative impact on your life. Of course, the problem we have at the moment is we have all these new habits. So our old habits aren't actually happening anymore because we don't have the old triggers that we used to have in our lives. So in the old days, pre-coronavirus, we would have our alarm go off in the morning, and that would trigger our habits, trigger our morning habit, which would probably be get up and out of bed, go and have a shower, go and have something to eat, put your suit and tie on, get into the car, drive to work, get started with your work. But of course, all those habits aren't being triggered at the moment because we don't have those triggers anymore. So all of a sudden, we're forming new habits. And what we want is we want those new habits to be positive habits and not negative habits. And of course, that's something we really need to concentrate on, because a habit is something that forms without us really being consciously aware of it. And it just happens without us being consciously aware of it. So we just do it. So we need to make sure that those habits that we form now in this new environment are positive habits that are going to make us more productive and make us mentally healthy. And of course, now there are a lot of negative habits that are forming. We have this new world order. We're all working at home, us and the kids, and we're all working on devices. And so we need to set up habits around that device use, which is positive and not negative, and which isn't going to impact on our mental health. And of course, we're also socializing on these devices. I really hate the idea of social distancing. I'd love to know who came up with that concept or that word, because I think it's causing issues with people. And what we should be talking about is physical distancing, because that's what's really important at the moment, and not social distancing. So social distancing, of course, would be where we're not socializing with other people. But as social animals, we need to socialize with other people. We, as humans, are the most social animal out there. And we've got to the point where we are now because of the fact that we're social. Huge part of our brain is dedicated to being social. It's been dedicated to socializing with people. We communicate via voice, which no other animal does in the way we do. We have language, which no other animal has in the way we do. We have huge areas of our brain dedicated to our ability to actually recognize different facial expressions, being able to recognize different body postures and so on, so that we can understand what people are thinking without even talking to them. And those areas need to be constantly used because we get stressed if they're not. And we need to have that social contact. So call it social distancing, I think, is a really bad thing to call it, because people then start thinking they've actually got to socially distance from each other. Whereas what we want them to do is actually just physically distance, but keep the social part of things alive and keep socialising with each other, which is really important. And to be honest, I've actually got many friends from overseas who I haven't seen for a long time who have actually set up social events over Zoom and over Skype, where you're actually seeing people that I haven't seen in many, many years by getting on Zoom and Skype. And that's a fantastic opportunity to actually catch up with people who I haven't seen for ages. But we also need to be aware that, you know, working in this sort of environment where you've got two kids either side, a kid either side of you, you're on the couch, you're going to get a sore neck, and you're not going to be very productive because you're going to get interrupted all the time, isn't ideal. The other thing that's I was reading is that pajamas, the sale of pajamas has actually gone through the roof since people have been working at home, because everybody's wearing pajamas at home. Again, is that really a good habit to be forming, where you're actually sitting around in your pajamas all day and you're not actually getting up, getting dressed, having, you know, a normal habit that actually is healthy for you? I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, I completely agree, Mark, to be honest. There's a few things there. Firstly, in relation to getting up, getting dressed, I'm a very strong believer is how you look is how you feel. If I wore my pajamas, I'd probably be walking around like a zombie half the day and feel half asleep. Whereas if I get dressed and I get ready for a work environment, even though it's not a work environment or it's not the old work environment, I certainly feel that I'm much more prepared and professional than what I would be if I was slouching around in my pajamas all day. Not to mention the fact that I feel that probably some of the people that I speak to on Zoom might be a bit concerned if I jump in on my pajamas each and every time. But I couldn't agree more about the term physical distancing. I agree. I've been more social, particularly with members of my family who are in the UK. Than what I have been for the last 12 months. I have a daily catch up with my mum, which hasn't really changed. But I speak to my father twice a week. I speak to my sisters every other day. I'm speaking to friends who I haven't connected with, who might be in different countries, who might be in the UK in a very long time. And while we are going through this tough time and we are isolating, I think that social contact it is more important than ever. And if we need to maintain that human connection, and if that can't be in a face-to-face meeting, that can't be meeting people, going out, shaking hands, we need to reinvent that. So I think physical distancing is definitely the term that I'll be using moving forward, and I'll leave the social distancing out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it is so important for us as people, and especially because there are a lot of mental illness problems that are actually arising as a result of this. And I think a lot of that's because of this social distancing that we're doing, where we should be just physically distancing.
Definitely.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to talk a bit about this dopamine and addiction a little bit further. One way to increase dopamine response and increase the amount of dopamine is to use a technique called variable or intermittent reinforcement schedules. This is something that's been looked at for probably about 100 years in psychology, and the casinos have spent billions of dollars actually using this technique and actually making sure this technique works optimally in their devices. So basically what the idea is that rather than giving someone a reward on a regular basis, if you hold off on that reward just for long enough that they're really anticipating that reward and then give them the reward, you get more dopamine release than you would have if you actually did it on a regular basis. So there's these really nice variable reinforcement schedules that you can use to optimize the amount of dopamine that's being released. So the more likely you are to become addicted to whatever it is that you're actually getting reinforced to be addicted to. And as I said, casinos have spent millions of dollars optimizing this for the games that they actually have in there to get people actually addicted to them. And this increase in dopamine and using intermittent reinforcement is also used by tech companies. And they've all admitted that they use this same technique in their devices, and that's in their phones in their laptops, in their iPad, the pads. I shouldn't call them just iPads because there's other, I've forgotten the word for it now. Tablets, sorry.
Yeah.
Tablets, yes. How did I forget that word? Tablets, I shouldn't pick on iPads. Tablets, they all use the same methods. Facebook and Google and so on also use the same methods. And this is optimize your likelihood of return. So that all those companies, of course, work on this idea of likelihood of return, which is that they want you to come back and they want you to use their app. They want you to use their device. So every time you're getting pinged, every time you're getting boinged or little things bouncing, this is them trying to get you back on their device so that you feel as though it's extremely important to you and you need to actually do it. And we know now that people are addicted to these devices. College students in the US, 90% of them now have phantom buzz syndrome. Now, phantom buzz syndrome did not exist until we had mobile phones. Now, students actually feel a buzz on their legs, even though they haven't been buzzed, even though there's been no notification. It's called phantom buzz syndrome because it's a phantom buzz. And I have a colleague over in the US who took a whole group of his students out, his college students out into the desert, and 4 days later, even though they had no reception for 4 days, 25% of them still were getting buzzes on their legs. He's even taken students out into the desert and taken their phones off, and they still get buzzes on their legs. I actually did a presentation, big presentation to a whole bunch of managers recently, and one of the managers said, yeah, I get it on my wrist because of my iWatch, because his iWatch buzzes when he gets notifications and so on. And if he doesn't have his iWatch on, he'll get phantom buzzes on his wrist as a result of it. Now, that is a physical addiction to these devices, which we need to be really, really careful of. So casinos, as I said, use exactly the same method as these tech companies, and all the tech companies use it. Also, Facebook recently admitted that they actually hold off on likes to optimize the amount of dopamine you're going to receive when you get a like on Facebook, so that you will get addicted to Facebook. And all the other companies, again, use the same thing. So they'll hold off on the buzzes, or they'll hold off on the notifications to a point where you maximally will get dopamine release, so that you will get addicted more quickly and you'll feel as though you've really got to respond to that thing. So again, they're forming the habit and the addiction to these devices. And we know that we are actually wiring ourselves up to be depressed. So this is a huge study that was done in the US. Over 500,000 every year are surveyed. And they've shown that, as you can see, we get an increase in depression in females since 2012, 2013. Now, if you think about it, devices such as the iPhone and the iPad came out around 2007, 2008. And since then, we've had this slow increase and we've had a real bounce up just recently. It's only in females. There's interesting facts as to why the females show this rather than males. It's not because males aren't becoming addicted to it, but rather the females are more aware of the way they're feeling and their depressive symptoms, and so therefore they're more likely to actually identify as being depressed. Males don't tend to do that as readily, and that's why you don't see it in males. But we are seeing suicide, a huge increase in suicide in males, because males are more likely to suicide than to actually be aware that they're actually depressed. And we know that people with more friends on social media have a higher risk of depression and less friends in real life. So the more friends you have on social media, the less likely you are to catch up with friends in real life. And so therefore you lose friends. And as I was saying before, addiction is actually indicated by the fact that you're actually losing friends or losing loved ones and so on. And this is actually happening with people out there who are on social media, where they've got huge numbers of friends on social media, but they're not real friends, and they're not people they actually know or can count on in difficult situations. And they don't have any real friends to actually rely on in those situations. And we also know the more time you spend on a device, just on a screen, the more likely you are to have suicidal risk factors. So suicidal risk factors increase dramatically after about 4 hours on a device each day. So if you're spending more than 4 hours on a screen or on a device each day, you're increasing the likelihood of suicidal risk factors, which is a real concern, especially as we know in our society now, we're getting more and more people actually suiciding And of course, there's real concern at the moment that because people are at home and are socially isolating rather than just physically isolating, that we may see a spike in this even more, which is, a concern, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to spend time off these devices. And of course, productivity is affected because technology is designed to be attractive so that it sells. And what they want to do is they want to capture your attention. They want to get you looking at the devices. They want you on the devices, because if you're on the devices all the time, then you're going to feel as though you can't do without the device. And so therefore you're going to buy the next one, and you're going to upgrade it each time there's a new one, and you're going to spend more time on it, and you're going to tell everyone else that this is the best one and you shouldn't be on this one. You should be on an Apple, but shouldn't be on a Samsung, or you should have this app and you shouldn't have that app, and so on. And people get really, really attached to their phones. I heard recently a teacher got attacked because they actually tried to take a phone off a student. Again, suggesting that, these things are becoming so attached to us that we can't actually give them up, and we feel as though they're really part of our psyche. And I do a lot of presentations for parents as well, talking about the impact of phones on kids and on teenagers. And it's amazing how many of them have almost an emotional response when I suggest that we should actually be restricting the amount of time that the kids are actually on these devices, as though it's almost as though it's a necessity rather than a privilege to have a mobile phone. The other thing is, we know that if you've got a device near you, 10% of your attention is actually on the device, even if the device is turned off. So if the device is turned off and you have it beside you, so you've got your phone beside you, or you've got your iPad beside you, and it's turned off, 10% of your attention is on that device rather than what you're actually doing. Now think about it, that's 10% of your attention that you can't devote to what you're actually doing. That's 10% of your productivity that's going down when you've actually got a device next to you that's turned off. If you turn it on, far more of your attention then goes to that device. So if you have a phone in front of you, I'll grab my phone, which is turned off, and put it in front of you, even more of your attention is on that. Now, it depends on how addicted you are to that device as to how much of your attention goes onto it. But if you are really addicted to it, you're losing 50, 60% of your attention on that device, which means your productivity is going down by that amount of percentage,
That's also crazy, isn't it? Even if that phone is off, it's still in front of you, and it is still, it's still distracting you that much. I think that's absolutely crazy.
Okay. So it is, sorry, it seems to be covered anyway. I'll have coffee. Do you want to ask the question again?
So I couldn't agree more. I'm actually really surprised that, having a mobile phone in front of you, even if it's switched off, you're still thinking about it. It's taking away, that much of your attention. Imagining if it's on and everything. I find that's completely blown my mind, to be honest.
Yeah, it is amazing that we are so addicted to these mobile phones now. I mean, they are using amazing technology to actually get our addiction, to get the dopamine, as much dopamine as they can. As I said before, they're all using these methods of increasing dopamine by using intermittent reinforcement. You've also got to remember that 20% of people in the US have said that they'll actually check their mobile phone while they're having sex. I mean, that's quite astounding that people are so attached to these things that they're willing to stop and check their mobile phone. And it's probably even worse in kids. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of studies done yet in children, but all these studies have been done in adults. But what's happening in kids, we don't know yet. But we do know that there is, as the more time you spend on a screen or a device, the more symptoms of ADHD you have, and that's even as an adult. So it's really affecting your attention and affecting it long term. It's affecting your ability to task switch, so how you can go from one task to another, and it's affecting our memory. So our memory is actually decreasing, our ability to remember things is decreasing it's correlated with the amount of time that you spend on a screen. So it's affecting lots of parts of and it's really becoming something that's part of us which is not a good thing. I've yet to see any positives about the smartphones. They're something which are useful as long as you use them well, but they're not something that we should be giving to kids, and they're not something that we should simply allow the tech companies to use as they're using. We should have more restrictions over them, which I'll talk about in a little while. But over the last 10 years, we've shown that there has been an increase in stress, anxiety, depression, addiction, and suicide. And of course, the last 10 years has been this huge influx in the amount of time that we're spending on these devices. We've also know that there's been a decrease in sleep, in social skills, in emotional intelligence, in physical and intellectual abilities. And what's really interesting is that kids today have between 20 and 30% less bone density than they used to have before we actually had devices, because they're doing so much less sport and activities these days because they're on devices so much more. And of course, similar was probably happening with adults, but we haven't tested that. So what are we going to do? Well, we need to be really careful. As I said, we're setting up all these new habits now, and we need to actually change or ensure that those habits are positive habits rather than negative habits. One thing we need to remember is that we can't multitask. We can only switch from one task to another. There's no such thing as multitasking. It's been studied for many, many, many years now, and we know you can't multitask. And anyone says that they can multitask is not being honest. You can't multitask. You switch from one task to another, and each time you switch, you use resources. You use up limited resources that you have, so that at some stage you're going to run out of those resources. You're going to become exhausted, and you're not going to have to, concentrate any longer. So things that we can do to actually decrease the impact that it's having on our productivity. One is to place a reminder on your lock screen. When you have a habit or an addiction, you can't actually just change that habit or addiction. What you've got to do is alter the cues that are happening, which are triggering that addiction, or control them. So a habit or addiction, of course, becomes automatic. So there's a trigger, and then you do the behavior. You need to interrupt that trigger in some way. So by placing a reminder on your lock screen, on your phone, on your iPad, on your computer, which says, think about it before you do it, or do you really need to open that right now, or is this the right time to do what you're doing? Where you actually got to think about it. You get an opportunity to think about it, you get an opportunity to stop, use that big frontal lobe that you have as a human and go, maybe I shouldn't do that right now. And all the phones now allow you to do that. The other thing is to set up a monitoring app. A lot of the monitoring apps were designed for kids, but they work really well for adults. And what this will do is actually tell you how much time you're spending on different devices and on different apps. So you can actually look at the end of the day or at the end of the week and go, holy crap, what was I doing spending 5 hours on Facebook when I was actually supposed to be? That's why I didn't get that project done, or that's why I didn't. And then you can actually either delete those or you can do something else with them. Because we know that most of the apps that we've actually got on our phone aren't very useful. We now know that the steps apps, people have all these steps apps that they're using all the time now, and they have the wristbands and so on. And we know that people who get one of those or start doing that are more likely to put on weight after they actually have the step counter. And the reason for that is that they have the step counter and they get to the 10,000 steps or whatever, which 10,000 steps was just something someone came up with. There's no reason for doing 10,000 steps. But they'll get to the 10,000 steps, which is a completely random number, and go, oh, that's great, I can have a reward. Or I don't need to do any more steps today, or I can sit on my butt and watch YouTube. And so they don't actually do it anymore. Similarly, there's the heart monitoring app, so you monitor your heart. And again, people who use those are more likely to have a heart attack. And the reason is because they're worried about the fact that their heart rate's changing all the time, and they get really stressed about the fact that their heart rate's changing all the time. So they're actually more likely to get stressed about that, and then, the more stressed you are, the more likely you are to have something negative happen. Similarly, you've got apps that help you to meditate. But of course, if you've got an app running, your attention is on the app. So you're not actually in your mind, you're in the app. So you're actually not meditating. And it's been shown again that they're not actually helping with people to meditate. They're getting them back on it. They're attending to their devices. So they're great apps if you want to spend your time on your device, but they're not great apps for actually health and well-being. So set up a monitoring app. Turn off all your notifications. What you want to do is decide when you're going to check those different apps and use those different devices. You don't want somebody out there, the app companies, screaming at you all the time. Because each time you get one of those pings or bongs or whatever, A, you're getting dopamine release, which is making you more addicted to that device. And B, it's distracting your attention. You're switching. It's capturing your attention, which means it's switching you from the task you're doing to it. And when you switch to it, it takes up your resources. It stops your workflow. And it means that you're actually interrupted for around about 2 minutes when you actually go, yeah. If you actually then go to it and go, oh, I'll check what that is, of course, then it's completely happened for it, right? You've got no productivity at that stage because you're checking something else. So, you need to turn off all the notifications, everything on there, and schedule when you're actually going to check those things. Because then you decide when you're going to switch your attention, and you're not being switched backwards and forwards constantly, and you're not going to use up those resources. The other thing is to go old school. So we know that by writing, you remember more information than you do if you're on a computer and you're typing. You're more creative when you're actually writing with pen and paper. So you're actually better off taking notes and writing and printing something else. Get a printer, print out your PDF or whatever it is that you're trying to learn. Take the hard copy and write notes on it. Use it to actually remember what you're going to do, and then get on the computer and write your notes or whatever that you want to actually send to someone else, or just take a photo. Everything, all the devices now have cameras, so you can take a photo and you can upload that to whoever it is that you are going to talk to, or whoever it is you're collaborating with, or just as your own notes. And there are apps now that can convert that handwriting to real writing and so on. So it's a great way to actually, remember more and be more productive because you're actually writing. And you can turn off your screens when you're doing that, which is also fantastic. Also, schedule. So schedule. In the morning, I always write down on a piece of paper what my schedule is for the day. I have all my meetings and schedules and everything, of course, on the computer, but I write it down on a piece of paper so that I don't want to be notified 15 minutes before every meeting that you're going to have another meeting, which is going to interrupt you from the meeting that you currently have. And again, your task switching, when you do that, turn that off, use a piece of paper. And it's a great way to actually, again, have the piece of paper. So every time you're not in a meeting, you're not on the screen, you can turn off the screens and you can do whatever it is you're doing where you can actually concentrate. So yeah, write the schedule down on a piece of paper and write out the whole schedule that you're going to do for the day. Put in that schedule when you're going to check your emails, and only check your emails when you've scheduled to check your emails. So have, if you're like first thing in the morning, I'm going to check my emails for however long you're going to check your emails, but only for that long. And then 2 hours later, or 3 hours later, or 4 hours later, I'm going to check my email again. And then later on, I check my email first thing in the morning, I check my email at lunchtime, and then I check my email last thing at night. And that's it. And, unless you're working in an emergency department or you're working in an ambulance, you really don't need to be able to be notified every second of the day. No one's going to die if they send you an email and you don't respond to it immediately. And I think as a manager, you need to lead in this aspect. So you need to actually set this up yourself. You need to inform everybody who works for you in your team. This is when I'm going to check my emails. This is when I'm going to be available. And these other times, I'm actually going to do work. I'm actually going to focus on getting projects done. So if you want to call me or you want to email me, sure, email me anytime you like, but I won't respond to it until it's this time. And so your team then know that it's okay for them to do the same thing. And so again, they're going to be more productive because they're going to have long periods of time where they can actually concentrate on projects that they need to get done. And they're not going to be switching backwards and forwards and losing all that productivity. And they don't need to have the phone sitting beside them waiting for it to ding, where they're going to get constantly, oh, he's at the boss, he's at the boss, he's at the boss. So, as a leader, I think we should be setting up the expectation that that everybody in the team is not available all the time, but these are the set times that you are available. This is when we're going to have Zoom meetings. This is when we're actually going to be available on email. and the other times we're actually going to concentrate, which again, it's going to increase productivity. Another great way to actually increase productivity is a Pomodoro technique. This is a technique which has been studied scientifically for a long time now. It was originally devised in Italy, where they use this in cooking, the Pomodoro in cooking. And the idea is that you can only really concentrate well on any task for about 25 minutes. And so what you do is you set up your day in 25-minute lots with 5-minute break, 25-minute lot, 5-minute break. So during that 25 minutes, all you do is you concentrate on that one task, that one project, and you will be optimally efficient at that task if you do that for that 25 minutes. And you set it up with a timer, because then you know how long you've got left. So you're working on the project and you go, oh, I've only got 10 minutes left. Really got to concentrate. Or I've got 15 minutes, I've got 5 minutes left. Or I really need to write down the final notes so that when I come back to this, I'll know where I'm at. And it works optimally to be productive. You then have 5 minutes off. So you have 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You can get up, move around, get a drink, get a cup of tea, whatever you need to do during that 5 minutes. Then you go back to either that same project or another project, and you have it set up before you actually start. You do that 4 times. At the end of the 4th time, you then have a 15-minute break, a longer break. It could be 15 minutes, or if it happens to be lunchtime, you could have a longer break for lunch, where you actually reward yourself for being very productive, and you will be very productive. That also could be a great time for you to check your email, or for you to set up Zoom meetings with your group or your team if you're a leader. But again, it's only during that time that you actually do that, and during those other 25 minutes, you're focusing on a project. Of course, that project could be a collaborative project where you're on Zoom with 2 other people or 3 other people. But again, it's just for that project, and it's just for that 25 minutes, and then you have the break, and then you have another 25 minutes. And again, it's been shown scientifically to be the most efficient way to get stuff done, to get important things done. So it's a great thing to set up for you. And that's it. That's my 6 suggestions for being more productive in this at-home, on-devices life. It's difficult. Most of us are addicted to these devices. So, we've gone into this environment where we're already addicted to them. But before, we had all these other habits which would, draw us away from these devices. Now, it's 24 hours a day where we're on the devices, and we need to be really careful of it so that we don't come out of this at the end all completely overwhelmed by our devices and spending all day watching the news and checking our email and being distracted by ding dangs and dongs. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Some fantastic information there. I mean, for me, there's a lot of key takeouts and key learns that I'll be putting into practice in my day to day. Even just down to scheduling out your time. I know that commonly I do like to dedicate my time to certain tasks, but the challenge that you can often have then is the expectation that you've got from your team and from your management team. They're used to you being on Teams, on Zoom, on Google Hangouts, on email, on the phone. If you're trying to change, that routine and block out that time, I imagine that communication would need to be quite key, and obviously laying out that expectation of the why and why you're doing such things, and also making sure that you've got those scheduled times in each day where people can reach you, they can reach out to you, you are contactable, and ensuring that happens regularly and those times are communicated.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a really key aspect to it. And I think, leaders need to lead, and they need to be very open about what their expectations are, both for them and for their team. And I think if you are a leader of a big team, I would, have the schedule that you're going to use and email that to all your team and say, this is my schedule. You should match yours up with mine. These are the times I'm available, and these are the times I'm not available. And I think by leading that way, you no longer expect all of the team members to be available, but rather that they also have the time to be productive and to get stuff done. And I think as a leader, you're going to have a lot more stuff done, which is what we all really want, right?
For sure, for sure. I think the other thing that definitely resonates with me is going back and being a bit old school. I mean, I've been working on a number of tenders this week, and just not having a printer in the house to print everything out and to physically go through and highlight key areas and make your notes. I'm quite a visual person, so I really need it to touch it and to feel something and to be able to write my own notes on that. So that's definitely a challenge for me. But I mean, every day I will set up my day by physically writing out a to-do list. And what actually helps me along throughout the day is when I cross those tasks off, it gives me that sense of achievement. I mean, some days if you sat in the same spot, for 8-10 hours a day, churning out work, and you've taken lots of phone calls and you've been multitasking, as we call it, and you've not actually managed to finish any of your tasks, you can come to the end of the day and feel a bit like, what have I achieved? What has my output been? Whereas if I look at my to-do list and I see everything that I've crossed off, it definitely gives me that push and that sense of achievement. So definitely something that I'll be continuing with moving forward.
Awesome. Hopefully it'll work out well.
Thanks. And I mean, look, as I mentioned to you before, it's every single day this situation is changing, and it is very uncertain. We're not sure what that means. I mean, looking back, I didn't think that 6 months ago, 3 months ago, that I would be working from my spare room 8 to 10 hours a day, and working from the kitchen table. How do you see the working community transforming beyond today?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think anyone's got a crystal ball, which makes it really difficult. And this is such an unknown situation. I think at the moment we're in I think we've had this period where all of a sudden this has all happened and everyone's been stressed about getting things done and moving home and getting things set up and everything for the home environment, which has been great because it's all given us something to focus on and given us, a goal. I think now is going to be the most difficult time because now we're unsure when things are going to open up again. And so we're all at home, unsure what's going to happen in the future, unsure when things are going to happen. And we've already set everything up. But I think this is when a lot of productivity will actually die off. I think a lot of people will become, depressed during this period and worried about things. People will be staying in their pajamas and not having showers for weeks, and which is going to be a real downer for a lot of people. And I think this is when we really need to focus on people's well-being and getting people productive and getting them in good habits and good ways of doing things. In the future, I've heard a lot of people talk about the fact that in the future, a lot more people are going to be working from home, and there's going to be a big change in the way things are done. Personally, I think it's actually going to be quite the opposite. And I think a lot of people are going to really have a negative experience of working from home because you've got your kids at home, you're not able to go out, you're not able to do the things that you used to do. And so I think there'll be actually a bit of a backlash where a lot of people will want to get back to work and actually want to get back to the office, will want to get up in the morning, put a tie on, a suit on or whatever, and go to work and to socialise with people. And again, the social aspect of it, we as humans, a huge part of our brain is dedicated to socialising and to being social animals, and that includes grooming. So again, lots of people have been talking about the fact that, we won't shake hands anymore. Whereas I think, no, that's going to probably increase because we're going to want that human connection, that connection with each other. And as soon as we're allowed to shake hands again, I think everyone will be shaking hands again. I think more people will be shaking hands to get that connection with them. So I'm not as positive about this whole idea of people, staying home. We talked about earlier about there being some nice aspects to it, going for a walk in the morning with your partner, or seeing the kids at dinner time and spending time with the kids at night. I think those are lovely things, and I hope we do, hold on to those things, and I hope that does continue. But I don't see a big shift in people wanting to stay at home. I actually spoke to recently a group who a lot of them were artistic types. It was a media organisation, and the manager there said, that before this happened, a lot of his team actually wanted to work from home, and they were reluctant to let that happen because they wanted the interaction and so on. But the team all were like, no, you know, I want to be freelance and I will work from home. And now this has happened. They're all hating it because they don't have that ability to bounce ideas off each other or scribble things in front of each other or, hey, what do you know, and do the fun stuff that they used to do together as a group because they're all on Zoom. So, you know, they've gone from, oh, we want to do this to now going, God, when can we get back to, to the office so that we can actually interact with each other and be creative and just draw on pieces of paper and stuff. So, yeah, I don't see it being as big a change as a lot of people. I think there's going to be some, you know, a lot of companies are going to go under and all those sorts of things, which is going to be awful. And there'll be a lot of unemployment. And I imagine there probably will be some sort of recession and so on. But I think as far as work-life balance, I think a lot of people will want to get back to work and will want to get back to the office and will want to socialise again with people.
Definitely. I mean, for me, just my personal opinion, I think that we definitely won't go back to that, you know, 8 till 6 office environment, 5-6 days a week, then coming home and you know, completing more work at home, getting up on a Saturday and Sunday and doing more work. I think that from a balance perspective, we will definitely maintain some of that balance and take, as we've said, you know, some of the nicer parts, you know, of this experience and incorporate those, you know, into our day to day. But, you know, even just how the workplace itself is set up to, you know, to trigger different behaviors. You have your collaborative spaces, you have your quiet spaces. You know, I think that social interaction, I mean, I can't wait to get into the office. I haven't actually been into the office at all yet since I started, which has been a big learn for me. But I really do hope that we can take, you know, some areas of balance and well-being and the family piece that we're you know, much more in touch with now, you know, and integrate that, you know, with the old and with that 8 to 8 or 8 to 6 office environment, and have a happy medium. I think that would be fantastic if we could all move forward in that way.
That would be a great positive outcome for it all.
Definitely. Well, look, Mark, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know that the advice that you've provided today, you know, we have much support to the working community. So thank you very much. Mark's details will be on the screen. And if you would like to reach out to Mark, you know, please click on the links and Mark will be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.